I'm Jasmine Al-Gamal, and this is The View from Here. For this week's episode, I sat down with Wael Al Zayat, the CEO of Emgage, an organization working to empower Muslim Americans through civic engagement. We talk about what it means to lead a national organization in this moment, one in which Muslim Americans are becoming more politically active, but also more targeted, as we saw during the mayoral race in New York recently. Wael walks us through the trends he's seeing within the community, how attitudes are shifting, and what issues are driving people to the polls. We also talked about Emgage's experiences engaging with the Biden administration and the Trump and Harris campaigns last year. And of course, we talk about anti-Muslim hate and whether it is being normalized. I also asked Wael about allyship across communities and what we can all do as people who care about equality, human rights, and international law to affect a political system that seems to work only for the privileged few. Wael Al Zayat, welcome to The View from Here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jasmine. Great to see you.
When we met, we were in grad school, and then we both started working for the U.S. government. I was at the Defense Department, you were at the State Department. And now you're the CEO of an organization called Emgage USA. Emgage educates and mobilizes Muslim American voters in support of policies that enable our communities to thrive and our democracy to flourish. Can you tell us a little bit about what that actually means, what Emgage does, and what you feel you have done with it since you became CEO?
No, thanks, Jasmine. And again, it's great to reconnect. And congratulations on your show and program and what you've accomplished since.
Thank you.
Emgage essentially seeks to empower the Muslim American voter to make sure that their voices are heard, that they are seen, and that they have impact like any other American on the decision makings that affects our lives. And the most important element of that, in our view, is making sure that our community votes. Voting is not just a right here in America, but I think it's a privilege as someone who's grown up in a place that lacked the ability to vote freely in a place like Syria before the current change there. And it's also important in terms of integrating the community into the fabric of this life, of this society, of this country. And so voting, and not just for presidential elections, but every election, every year, for local races, for state races, cumulatively over time, if you create that culture of civic engagement, we believe that is good for America and that's good for the community itself. And so what that looks on the ground is that we have teams throughout the country in states like Michigan, Florida, Texas, and elsewhere with large Muslim American populations that educates voters on voting, and that literally knocks on their doors to tell them, hey, are you going to vote? You should vote. What are the issues that you care about? That use phone banking. We call people. We send them text messages, and we invest in digital social media ads and even TV ads to make sure that the community is educated and is getting out there. And we've seen a trend, particularly since, alhamdulillah, since I joined the organization in 2017, and the team that we assembled and that we put together in increasing Muslim civic participation, particularly in those states, but elsewhere. And we think we've been part of this broader movement that includes so many other groups and organizations and activists and influencers who have contributed to, I think now, is a renaissance of growth in Muslim American civic participation. And we'll talk more about that. So despite the challenges, the trend has been very positive.
Absolutely. And there are many challenges, and we will get to that. And I do get your text messages, by the way, also. So let's talk about Muslim Americans, the demographics. I think a lot of people tend to assume that Muslim Americans are all Arab, are all Middle Eastern, but actually the Muslim American community in the U.S. is so varied. You have Black Muslims, Latino Muslims, Arab Muslims, South Asian Muslims. It's a younger population, I believe, than the average American. I'm reading some statistics here from Pew. It basically says Muslims make up slightly more than 1% of the U.S. adult population, but they can have a significant political impact in areas where they are most highly concentrated, which I guess then makes sense for you to want to make sure that they're civically engaged and that they have a voice in our democratic process. It says here that for much of the last 2 decades, Muslims have been far more likely to identify with or lean towards the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. And I assume that probably was a result of the policies of the Bush administration after 9/11 that turned away a lot of Muslim Americans. But a 2023-2024 religious landscape study shows now that the Democratic advantage has actually shrunk considerably, and that only now around half of Muslim adults, 53%, identify or lean toward the Democratic Party, 42% with the Republican Party. A lot of that has been attributed, perhaps unofficially, to disappointment with President Joe Biden's handling of the war on Gaza, which I know we're going to get into that because you were very involved in those conversations with the Biden administration and with the Harris campaign. But basically, I guess the summary is Muslims are diverse. Politically, ethnically, their political views are diverse. They don't tend to vote en masse for one political party or the other. Can you give us a sense of how you've seen trends either emerge or change within the voting patterns of Muslim Americans, including whether they have voted more or less over the last several administrations?
Yeah. And you're speaking to the challenge of this job and for the work that we do. The community is extremely diverse. It is the most diverse when it comes to ethnic background in particular of any faith community in America. It's one of the youngest, if not the youngest, I believe. A third of the community is Black. These are African Americans and African diaspora who, in a way, society sees them first according to the skin of their color. And therefore, a lot of the issues that affect them are very much synonymous with the experience of non-Muslim Black Americans. Racial justice, police brutality, economic justice that they seek, the legacy of slavery, institutional racism. And so we have to be attuned to those issues while at the same time, another third of the community is of South Asian descent, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. And then about a quarter is of Arab, Middle Eastern, like I am, from Syria. The community is about half US born, and the other half are born elsewhere. So you have the immigrant experience as well that plays into the thinking, the perception, and the prioritization of issues. The immigrant community sometimes will prioritize foreign policy issues, or at least they think they do, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll unpack it. While American-born, certainly in my opinion, the Black American community leads in our care for domestic issues that affect all of us on a daily basis. And so it's complicated, but it's also an opportunity, I think, for the political system to engage this community and meet it where it's at. And I can tell you, whether Republicans or Democrats, whether conservatives or liberals, there is something for all of them in this community. According to an Emgage poll that we did with Change Research a few months ago, or at least last year, the community, the faith community, is among the least loyal when it comes to political party identification, but is the most caring about positions on issues, which means that what they really care about is the actual position on an issue by any individual or political party. They want to know, what do you think about this issue and what do you want to do about it? Or what can you do about it? Whether it's Gaza, whether it is healthcare, whether it is other issues that confront us, which means the community's votes is generally up for grabs. And that's a lesson that we have taken away, and we try to impart it upon anyone who engages with us, whether from establishment, political parties, or local party officials. We tell them, look, don't assume anything about the community, engage it, listen to it, and they will vote for you if they see something in your platform that they like. And the opposite is true. Don't denigrate them and dismiss them and adopt openly hostile positions, because you will lose them even if you think that you got them. And but in spite of that, one of the trends has been that the community has been voting more Democratic because of the legacy of the war on terror and the weaponization of our own laws and our own law enforcement and national security apparatus against the community. So they have made that shift, and I think that accelerated under the Trump 1.0 years in particular.
The Muslim ban.
You know, the Muslim ban, the anti-Muslim rhetoric, that really pushed the community to a degree where about 60 to 70% of it did vote for Joe Biden. Actually, 70%, according to our polling, voted for Joe Biden in 2020. That number took somewhat of a hit, where a percentage of that community shifted to third party. But the numbers for Donald Trump in particular really did not change. They remained at about 20% from 2020 to 24, which is really interesting. A recent ISBU study found that and matched our numbers that about 20% of the community voted for Donald Trump. Where the shift happened is rather than going to Kamala Harris, it went to a third party candidate. And we'll unpack that a bit more. So both things are happening is that the community is issue focused, but at least for presidential, they are still voting more Democratic.
I'm wondering if we should jump right in to the Harris campaign and what happened there, because there has been a lot of backlash, at least against Arab Muslims, from people under the impression that they voted for Trump and that, they are to blame for everything that's happening now. I want you to try to unpack a little bit for us what happened in that election before we get into Gaza, because if you can,
right.
because they're just...
Hey, it's time for PTSD.
Oh, God.
Let's do it.
No, I don't even know if I'm still recovered, let alone you.
Yeah, I know.
Do you have a sense of who voted for whom and why? Well, what happened basically?
Yeah. No, we've done polling, and again, ISPU did some really good polling recently. Here are the facts. Somewhere between 40 to 50% of Muslim voters who voted in the last presidential elections voted for Kamala Harris. These are the numbers. And I know the perception has been different. But the majority of Muslim voters still went with the Democratic ticket for presidential, though that was a significant drop from the 60 to 70% that Biden enjoyed. So as I mentioned to you, the beneficiary of that was not Donald Trump. Donald Trump received about 20% of the community's vote. So if anyone wants to blame the community for Donald Trump's victory, they should look elsewhere. That's what the data tells us. But that missing 20, 30%, they went for probably Jill Stein. We didn't ask whether you voted for Jill Stein or not. We asked for a third party, and they said yes. And so she picked up a good chunk of the Biden would-be Harris voters, but they did not migrate all the way to Trump. Now, when you look into the ethnic breakdown of the voters, you do see that a larger percentage of Muslim voters of Arab descent did vote for Donald Trump. It was higher than South Asians, and it was significantly higher than Black Muslims. Black Muslims consistently voted for Biden and Kamala Harris throughout those studies. And so, yes, there was a pickup, but in the overall analysis, it was insignificant and insufficient in terms of turning the tide for Donald Trump or witnessing a massive shift. But breaking that down even further, yes, the war on Gaza and the genocide that we saw in Palestine really tormented and upset the community. I mean, you had community members with relatives dying or being displaced in not just in Gaza, but in Lebanon and in other places as well. I have my own staff who were affected with family members targeted and killed in Lebanon, for example, at the time.
So sorry.
And our chapters from Houston, Tampa, New York, here in Virginia, Dearborn, we talk about Dearborn and Detroit. I mean, it's still a very difficult situation because the bombings are still going on in spite of the announcements of the ceasefire, right? Lebanon's still being bombed. Gaza is still being bombed. There's still starvation. And so that really galvanized the community to make demands of elected officials, including the Biden administration, to support a ceasefire, to stop sending these weapons to the Israeli military that were killing people. And look, these demands actually were pretty consistent with broader polling of certainly the Democratic electorate, which overwhelmingly supported a ceasefire and a suspension or at least conditioning of aid to the Israelis, and with slight majority of even Republican voters who wanted to see a ceasefire. So there was really nothing unique here in that sense, but the intensity of it was certainly felt within those communities. I will also tell you, though, that it did intersect with conservative Muslims who prioritize social issues, particularly the question of gay marriage and of education, sex education, LGBTQ education in schools, and the question of when it's appropriate for the state or medical practitioners to be involved in the question of transitioning for minors. These were issues that our entire society is grappling with, and it did become a big issue in the lead up to the elections. I will say, though, that as a percentage of Muslim voters, consistently this issue did not rank as one of our top or second or third issues. The top issue was a Gaza ceasefire. The second issue, which is now the first issue, the top issue, it's inflation. And this again matches what the broader electorate has been telling us. It's jobs, it's cost of living. And so I really think that the conversation was in a bit hijacked by loud voices on those issues, not just in the Muslim community, but in the broader American landscape, as you saw, like Mothers for Liberty and some right-wing commentators wanted everyone to believe that communities of faith were willing to support Donald Trump over it. I think that was true to some degree, but at 20%, clearly it wasn't sufficient. It is not the majority of the community. Don't get me wrong. I do think that there are legitimate questions that our community would like to be engaged on, where we prioritize family, cohesion of the family. Yes, we have traditional views on what a traditional family is, but as a political motivator, this was not it. If anything it was the war in Gaza. But even that was not enough to drive more people to Donald Trump. All they did basically was express their dissatisfaction by voting for a third party. Now, as an organization, we made the hard decision by advising folks to vote for the Democratic ticket because of our fears, which unfortunately have been confirmed, of what a second Trump administration would mean for the Muslim community, for immigrants, for our country, and for the planet.
And I know so many people, Wael, who found themselves stuck between such a rock and a hard place to not be able to stomach the fact of voting for a candidate who wouldn't commit to distancing herself from Joe Biden's policies, and who at one point even said that she wouldn't change those policies. Basically, what I'm hearing from you really is that Muslims are just like everyone else in the United States, right? Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, shocking, I know.
But let's go step by step here. You and Emgage were a really critical part of the community and institutionally as an organization that made the decision very early on. I don't even know if it was a decision, really. I mean, that's just what you do, to engage with the Harris campaign, to engage with the Biden administration. You were attending meetings. And in the beginning, a lot of people and organizations were doing that. And then at a certain point, people started to drop off and say there's no point in attending meetings. We're just being used as window dressing. They're just checking a box to say we engaged with the community. So I know that Emgage did face a lot of criticism from certain people and organizations for sticking to that principle of, look, it's better to engage than not to engage. We're not under any illusion. We know they're probably not listening, but hey, someone needs to talk. And this is an issue I remember and watching that debate and with you in the center of that and thinking about it in a broader sense. Do you try to change the system by engaging with the system or even working within the system? Or do you pressure the system from the outside? And do you have to choose between one or the other? I've had to think about this personally for a long time. You and I both worked inside the US government. I remember countless conversations with you on Syria where we would lament foreign policy on Syria, and we were trying to change things as much as us little fish could change things on the inside because we believed in changing things and in having good people on the inside. So I already know that about you personally, but how did you approach that from an organizational perspective? What were those conversations with the Harris campaign, with the Biden administration, as much as you can share? Lessons learned that you got out of that? Would you take a similar approach in the future? And did you have pushback within your own staff and own organization in terms of the engagement approach that you were taking?
So look, our theory of change is to be engaged. Now, there are many paths to influence, to affecting change on policy. I think protest has its place. Leveraging of economic power has its place. I think culture, media, sports, arts, they all have a role to play here. And engaging in the political arena also is one of them. And if an organization literally with the name of Emgage, which is Engage Muslims, is not going to engage in the political arena, then we should be out of business. and we should just shut down and go home. Now, I will tell you from my experience, it's a lot easier to play it safe and stay out, to not engage with the decision makers or even those you disagree with. I found it extremely difficult to do those engagements in that environment. But I felt a sense of obligation as a leader of an organization that this was the time for courage. This is not the time to tell everyone what they want to hear and to stand with them and be derelict in my duties toward my community because I was too afraid. And my organization felt the same. I can tell you we had months of deliberations and conversations and contentious
Yeah.
arguments about what to do, about things that were completely well above our control. But do we, as an organization that is dedicated to civic engagement, to advocacy, to mobilizing voters, do we not have a role to not just post statements and protest letters, but to go wherever we may have the ability to speak directly to the powers they be? And in this case, we did. And by the way, we also engaged the Trump
Ah,
administration. Maybe our viewers don't know this. I personally flew to Michigan and met with the Trump team on at least one occasion that I recall, maybe two, basically laid out to them our expectations of whomever we may guide our voters to support, not just on Gaza, but on
yep.
domestic policy, on an expected travel or Muslim ban. And based on those engagements, we also made certain decisions. And internally, yes, I think this was a not just the engagement, by the way, it was just the very ability to continue our work as an organization that's telling people to vote and that your vote
Mm-hmm.
matters, right? People were losing hope, especially our young voters, our young people with, seeing what's happening and feeling unheard. People started talking about, well, it doesn't matter who you vote for, it's all the same. My God, I was like, we're going to lose 20 years of work here if that's how people feel. And we had staff who were really having a hard time explaining to their own families why would an organization like Emgage, supposedly that support the Muslim community, is still engaging with the Biden administration, let alone later on made an endorsement decision for Kamala Harris. We had some board members who had an opportunity to renew their membership and they decided not to extend it with us. But overall, I'll tell you what, I was so proud, and I still am, by how our group, our organization, came together in a deliberative manner where we voiced all of our concerns and our fears, and we agreed on our decisions together. And my organization, my staff are still together, and I think stronger because of it. Was that the only thing we could have done, and would I do anything differently? In terms of the decisions, no. In terms of how we communicate them and engage our communities even more thoughtfully, consistently, yes, I would absolutely do even more of that. Me personally, I would. I got to tell you, though, I guess if people want to understand a little bit and give us some grace, it was a traumatizing period. Yeah, I mean, just imagine being in the midst of this. I got the White House calling me who want to meet, and I'm feeling the obligation that I should. I'm speaking to representatives of the Palestinian community, asking them if I go, what kind of messages should I deliver? I got my own staff who are afraid for their, family members. We're afraid of Trump actually winning and knowing what that's going to bring. And, as somebody who knew some of the senior folks on the Biden team, I was both disappointed, but also more dead set on speaking truth to power and learning from that. And we'll talk about that a little bit. We have a serious problem here in the entire foreign policy apparatus of America when it comes to the region. This is clear. And a lot has been written and said about it, but I lived it, you lived it. Orientalism still guides U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, whether for Republican or Democratic administrations, and it comes in different ways, in different forms. I think it's more severe and sinister on the Republican side, but it definitely exists in Democratic administrations. And one of the lessons is until we make sure that we have people are policy, right? Until we have people who do not view the region as the other and its people as the other, its voices as the other, and generally treat Arab and Muslim Americans here as people with meaningful contributions, not to be dismissed or cynically used or manipulated. And until we have representation of our voices in those key decision making, we're going to keep producing these terrible policies and wondering why we keep getting the Middle East wrong. I can't think of any region in the world that has so little representation when it comes to national security and foreign policy, whether it's Africa, Latin America, East Asia. You go take a look. There are representatives of those communities who are qualified as part of that decision making, except when it comes to the Arab world. And that impacts policy in
Absolutely.
ways that are direct and indirect.
On that point, though, and I completely agree with you, I always say that policy is people. People who make policies, and those policies affect people. So if you don't have representation inside of government, you're not going to be able to change policy the way you want. So I always try to, in my dialogue with activists or protesters, to say, we need you, but you also need people who are going to go in and actually enact and push for the policies that you're advocating for on the outside. You can't do one without the other. I will say, though, here that there are a couple of reasons, I think, why we don't have adequate representation. One is a tendency to view the system as awful and evil and we're not going to touch it. But there is also an internal reason, which is it's harder for people from the region to get security clearances. There's a lot more discrimination. Whenever someone who is Arab or Muslim gets even a bit too high profile or public, you get attacked. People ask themselves whether they want that kind of scrutiny, and that obviously takes a huge toll on your mental health and your family life and your social life. So there are a lot of obstacles still to Muslims and Arabs being represented inside of government. I think that's partly why Mamdani's win was so huge. It wasn't just the policies he was running on, but it was also how unapologetic he was about his identity. And even though he didn't make his identity the centerpiece of his campaign, but he had to, because he was being attacked on his identity so often. But let's get back to, okay, so you've explained, and thank you for explaining that decision. And I really can't imagine the kind of pressure you were under in all of these different ways, not just personally as a voter, but also you're responsible for this organization, for your staff, for board members, and you're trying to do the right thing, and I get it. What was that engagement like? Sometimes when I look back, I wonder, and this was in real time too, how many missed opportunities both Biden and Harris, when it came to just talking to the community, to making them, feel heard and seen. When Donald Trump goes and stands on a stage in Dearborn, Michigan, surrounded by imams and other members of the community, and there's no such recognition or engagement on, or at least very little. For me, the real kicker, I burst into tears when I saw this. It was the Democratic convention. And inside the convention, it was joy and music. At the same time that was happening inside the convention, I saw a member of the uncommitted movement outside. They were desperately kind of trying to get people to pay attention to them. They hadn't been given a representative on the stage. We found out that a Palestinian American speaker, Rua Roman, was supposed to get a slot. She didn't. And then at some point, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar went out to that group. He's this giant of a man, and he just put his head on her shoulders, and he was bawling. His shoulders were heaving, and I just broke down when I saw that. And I broke down because I felt like we were so excluded from that moment of joy and inclusivity and optimism, and it felt like such punch in the gut. So what was going on behind the scenes, despite all of your engagement with them? Why did they fail so badly to include the community?
Myself and my team at Emgage were actually at the convention, and some of my staff ended up staying outside as part of that vigil, demanding that a Palestinian voice be heard. I do want to say, first of all, that a historic number of Muslim speakers spoke at the convention, 5 of them. So there were 5 Muslim Americans, including from the Black Muslim community, who were on that stage. But still, I think not having a Palestinian speaker after Israeli speakers were there, families of a hostage at the time spoke, I think was a missed opportunity signaling something deep that I think everybody at that convention would have understood, which is our common humanity, and that this is indeed a big tent party. I think not doing it and other missteps, including the level and intensity of the engagement with the community, speaks to a party that's in search of an identity.
Still,
Still, I think the Democratic Party is not sure who it is
I
right now.
agree.
Is it is it the party of corporate interests, of transactional policies, pro-Israel only interests in the Middle East at all cost? Or is it truly a progressive alternative and vision for America that's prioritizing labor rights, cost of living, and, dare I say, equity between Israel and the Palestinians? These are two divisions that exist right now, these visions in the Democratic Party, and that was a manifestation of it. Now, you know which side of the party was winning the day during the elections: the conventional wisdom people, the corporate interest people, the pro-Israel voices that were saying, hey, we can't have a Palestinian on stage. It's going to upset the donors. It's going to upset, what people think about Kamala Harris moving forward. It's going to shake the foundation of the party. Look, with all due respect, this is the Senator Schumer way of thinking, right? This is the
It's
Hakeem
the
Jeffries way of
establishment.
thinking. This is the establishment of the party. And look, they might be wonderful on a lot of other stuff, but on these core issues that are affecting our voters, whether it is cost of living, protection of labor, making sure that we have food on our table, and that our money is not used to kill children halfway across the world in the Middle East, that's what Democratic young voters, and increasingly a growing percentage of it, is demanding. Where the party is today is not where its leadership is. That's very clear. And so you see this mixed messaging. They're like, hey, we'll bring 5 Muslims and that's going to fix the problem. Not going to fix it. It's great. We want it, but it's not enough, right?
Right.
This is because it ends up being a bit performative. You're trying to, in a way, to get the community, which we just spoke about its diversity, to trade off one part for another. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. The only way that not just our voters, but young voters, Latino voters, black voters, all these voters that have now come part of this party, is they have to see themselves in it, and which makes it a difficult job. Guess what? Diversity is more difficult than being exclusive. It just is. But you have a stronger, more resilient outcome when you do the hard work. I believe, and by the way, I would love to see the Republican Party also stop being a little bit less racist and focus more on the day-to-day issues of the community. Some Republicans are understanding that, and you see this in some local and state races, right? They're engaging the community, they're listening to it, and I think you're going to see a shift at the local state level in future vis-a-vis the Republican Party. But all this to say is the convention was, I think, a symptom of a bigger problem, right? Is that the conventional wisdom folks think that the Palestinian issue is not a winning issue. Well, in New York, it is. In other places, it may not be, and I understand that. And I think for our own community as well, I think part of our struggle right now is how do you engage with all aspects of the American political system, particularly those who you don't agree with, including those who, as of right now, are still overwhelmingly or in a very biased way supporting the state of Israel and all of its
Yeah.
policies. We believe that those folks need to be engaged and given an opportunity to amend their policies and their positions. And those who don't, yeah, we believe that they should be replaced. But we should be careful not to boycott ourselves out of the
Yeah.
political process. Because in every election, what candidates do, they just simply look at the communities. They look at who is engaging them, who is voting, and who is supporting with their money. And if we remove ourselves from that equation, they're going to bypass us. I don't see that's happening everywhere, but in some pockets it is, and it does concern me. But moving forward, I think the fight is now for the orientation and for the vision of the Democratic Party. And very soon it will be for the Republican Party, as I'm assuming Donald Trump will not run for a third term. Whether it's J.D. Vance or someone else, I think the fight is now for these basic questions. What does either party stand for? Is it for the American people first or something else? And we say the American people, who do we mean by the American people? Is it a particular race or religion? Or is it an idea and people who ascribe to that idea? And Emgage is very committed to making sure that it is America playing a good role in the world, and that all Americans are treated equally based on their commitment to those values or those ideals and not the skin of their color or the God they may worship to.
Absolutely. That's so well said. And it brings me back to something that you said at the beginning, which is about how diverse the issues are that Muslim Americans care about, everything from social justice to foreign policy to economy to family issues. And also the fact that on foreign policy, Muslim Americans were increasingly aligned with the new base of the Democratic Party. It seems to me their intersectionality is a really important issue here when it comes to the Muslim American community working with other communities on these issues. These are not just Muslim American issues that you're talking about. Social justice is not an issue that belongs to one group or the other, because what we've been seeing since Donald Trump came to power is that all these issues are becoming intertwined. I think they were always intertwined, but now you're seeing immigration, Gaza, the Middle East, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hate, lack of due process, deportations, everything is just becoming melded into one big issue, which is really about human rights, democratic practices, and equality and fairness. And if I could just use that as a jumping point to now look at Zohran Mamdani's campaign and how he spoke about these issues and your assessment of how that campaign unfolded, the rhetoric, the fact that he was not afraid to talk about certain things that previously Democrats had been afraid of, the fact that he was not endorsed and still has not been by a majority of the establishment, Democratic leadership and Democrats. Let's start with that, and then I want to talk about some of the specifically anti-Muslim rhetoric that really, like I said before, shocked me in its scale and permissiveness.
Yeah. Look, I think that this speaks to the fear of those in power, whether on Israel or our economic situation at home, our domestic economic policies. They have been comfortable and, in fact, believing that their safety and well-being is tied to those existing systems, whether it is the discriminatory policies of the Israeli state, the ongoing occupation in spite of them claiming otherwise, or of the corporate greed and the inequitable economic system we live in. Clearly, they are okay with it. That they have defined their safety and security according to those established paradigms. And so what Zohran represents is not necessarily a direct threat to them, but it's to those ideals and those systems they have based their values
and
on.
benefited from.
It is an assault on their very understanding and definition of who they are. And this is where you see that perhaps younger or more progressive Jewish voters did not have that problem because their value system is already rejecting those inequities. You see even people of means in New York City, wealthy people supporting Zohran Mamdani because their definition of their well-being as affluent New Yorkers is not based on the subjugation of the working class, right? And so I've seen this even with Muslim voters in New York. Some who in their mind felt that Zohran really will represent an assault on capitalism did not vote for him. Obviously, they were in the minority. And so this is to me what Zohran really represented. And when it comes to the question of Israel, really, you see the visceral reaction that's still continuing right now and the weaponization of his faith, all in the service of protecting that edifice, that Israel is a true democracy, shining beacon on the hill, and all that bullshit. It's a society that is deeply flawed. Many societies are flawed in the world. Many states are flawed in the world. I was born in Syria. I can spend days and months talking about the flaw in Syrians. The system of providing unconditional support to any country, no matter what it does, especially in this case, that's leading to death and destruction of a whole people, should be examined. And also the prioritization of our well-being as a society. I mean, at a time where we are facing economic hardship and inflation, our own society and country needs some deep investments, education, healthcare, infrastructure. And so the American people have a right to ask those questions right now. And I think those conversations are finally happening, which is good. Look, in a way, it had to happen to be a brown Muslim guy named Zohran who forced open that conversation in many ways. And in a way, look, we're very proud of this as Muslims, as people, myself, of immigrant background, because perhaps we understand most the value of democracy and the freedom of speech. There's no way we can ever take it for granted. And I will say that this also speaks to the beauty of America, right? We're at times where we are, sometimes we feel like we're bashing our own country. It speaks to the miracle that America is, that someone like Zohran, in the time that we are living in, after all the conclusions people drew about our country and voters last year from the election of Donald Trump, that someone like him can win in a place like New York City. I think this speaks to the beauty of the country, to its potential, to its promise, I think to the goodness of its people, if you just lead them well and show them the way forward.
I'm looking at an article you wrote just a couple of days ago, actually, yesterday, what Zohran Mamdani's victory tells us about America. And you do end with saying, on November 4th, we saw that America is equally capable of producing leaders like Mamdani who fight for the common good. It did come at a great cost, though, and maybe we can just spend the last few minutes talking about the ugliness, the vitriol that was directed against him, against Muslims. And I won't even repeat the things that were said because I don't want to give them oxygen. But again, what surprised me was how few members of the Democratic Party in leadership positions stood up for Muslims and stood against people like Congressman Randy Fine and others who are just being outright, blatantly anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. Tell me a little bit about wearing your hat as a member of a Muslim civic engagement organization. Where do you go from here? Are you worried that this kind of rhetoric that has been normalized or renormalized, I would say, because we did see this after 9/11.
Yeah.
It went away for a while. It was kind of under the surface, came back with Donald Trump in 2016, has reached a fever pitch, I would say. And I don't see it retreating. I see it only being further normalized. First of all, do you agree with the assessment that it may only get worse? And then also, what are you doing about it as an organization? How are you supporting Muslim candidates for office who may be or want to run for office, who may be really worried about facing this level of hate and harassment? And where do you go from here as Emgage?
Unpleasant and as harmful as it has been, this resurgence in anti-Muslim bigotry and rhetoric is not surprising because it really never went away. It has been allowed to be normalized. In many ways, also, it really was tolerated because it was directed at Muslims. But now the public is clearly seeing that these policies that stifle freedom of speech, that weaponize the state and its law enforcement agencies, particularly ICE, were ultimately going to come back and harm the broader society. And I think there's now a deeper appreciation for the mistakes of allowing such policies or laws like the Patriot Act, for example, expanding the budget of ICE, of allowing surveillance on whole communities of Americans, that, hey, this can be used against other groups, including political opponents of an administration. And I think in that, hopefully, there are some lessons to be made and for redoubling of efforts to not only counter what we're seeing, but ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. I do think that not just Zohran, but I think the broader questions that are being posed now, whether it is on the domestic or foreign policy issues that are now on the table, including the U.S.-Israel relationship, I think that's going to generate a lot of instinctual, reflexive, defensive responses by those who are committed to the existing status quo. And that's going to continue. And it's going to be mixed with the classic white supremacist, anti-Muslim bigotry that we've been seeing probably since the Crusades. That's not going to go away. The question is it going to resonate? Are enough people going to listen to it and act upon it? I think if New York is an indication, I think the answer is no.
Well, but New York is very different.
I think the American people...
New York, you know,
I
the
understand.
coasts.
I understand. And there are concerns with rising anti-Muslim, not just bigotry, but incidents and attacks, which have increased since October 6. But I am hopeful that it will not gain enough traction. But what Emgage is doing is, with other civil liberties organizations and also voter mobilization organizations, is number one, making sure that we are engaging with both the federal government, the state governments, and also local governments, with law enforcement, as well as with our elected educating them, making sure that we are watching what they do, that there is accountability. And specifically, you mentioned Randy Fine and a few other elected who have trafficked in bigotry and hate. We will work to get them out of office. Our job is to make sure that the voices that are in Congress are our voices. And the moment they stop being, then they have to be replaced. And so Emgage is very focused on races in Florida, in New York. The midterms are next year. Look, it's a democracy still hanging on by a thread. We are keen on supporting allies who speak to our collective interests as Americans in an equal way, who believe in those democratic ideals and our pluralistic democracy, and opposing those who don't. And, there is a partisan side to Emgage where that work happens. But at least at the civic education piece, we have an obligation to make sure that not just our voters, but all voters understands what is happening, that the elected are given a shot at learning about our communities, what we actually stand for, and given an opportunity to represent all of us. And so we're already thinking of next year. We're already thinking of the midterms. We're already mapping out the races. We're already mapping out our allies. And we'll keep at this. If you're serious about this work, this is a forever work. You cannot take democracy and the safety of your community for granted. Fascism doesn't rest. It will never sleep. It's never going to go away. The question is, can you keep it weak enough that it doesn't control your society, your government, and the world? And we're in a difficult period overall. But whether it's Zohran or Ghazala Hashemi, the first lieutenant governor Muslim candidate and elected now in Virginia, and others, they don't have to be Muslim. I mean, there are good candidates out there that we support. They're winning too. And so the country and its voters are up for grabs. Our future is up for our grabs, and we should have to keep fighting for it.
Absolutely. And again, I want to stress that allyship is so important here, and that you don't only as an organization endorse Muslim candidates, you endorse candidates.
No.
When you say our
just a small
people, it's really
actually.
our people as a principled,
Absolutely.
inclusive, democratic voices.
If I were to add a line, look, I think the Muslim American community need to step up more right now in these difficult times, not just about Gaza, but these detentions of immigrants, breaking up of families, the weaponization of our National Guards and ICE against our own citizens and immigrants, even if they are undocumented. We want to talk about Islamic values, and you care about families and you care about justice. This is a moment to speak up about that and not to cower. We have to be part of the movement for dignity, for restoring our rights, for our democracy. And Emgage is part of that. And I just hope that others in our community also do that.
Maybe that's one last question. What can people do tangibly? Someone is listening to this podcast and they say, okay, fine, I'm convinced, I need to get involved. What do people do?
Well, first of all, stay involved in even your local and your state affairs. There are decisions being made on a regular basis. There's going to be the midterm elections next year with huge consequences regarding the balance of power in America. Get informed about that. Ask your candidates what they stand for. Check out emgageusa.org or emgageaction.org to support organizations like ours or others who are doing this work. Attend city council meetings. Attend meetings with your members of Congress in their district. Speak up, right? And even join these mass mobilizations and protests for actions, whether it is vis-a-vis what's happening with the Trump administration or others more locally. Get activated, get to know those communities that are being harmed, reach out to them and see how you can be a friend or a helper or a supporter. But again, folks can reach out to us and we can be in more in-depth conversation with them to figure out what's the best way for their interests and their capabilities.
All right. It's been a very bumpy ride, and I don't think it's going to be any smoother over the next couple of years. I do agree with you that we should all be doing what we can. Thank you for everything that you do. Thanks for the time that you took to chat with me and my listeners, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. All right. Thanks a lot.
I hope you found that conversation insightful and learned some things you didn't know before. If you'd like to support our work moving forward, please don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to our videos on YouTube, and leave a comment and review to make sure we know what you're thinking. You can also always email us at jasmine@viewfromherepod.com. That's jasmine@viewfromherepod.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'm Jasmine El Gamal, and this is The View From Here.